There's an abandoned hotel in my town that's been vacant for decades. It has been bought out several times, but every time the owners ended up going bankrupt after just a few years. Our town is small and kind of old fashioned, so there's really no reason for anyone to visit unless they have a family here, which means there's no reason to even have a hotel as big as this one was. It's at least 6 stories tall and probably the largest building in our town. Anyway, when I was 23, I just decided to casually check it out. I felt like there was nothing actually dangerous or scary about it. It was just an empty abandoned building that would be cool to walk around and look at. I decided to go during the day because I figured that if anybody else was there, they were probably just harmless people exploring it like me. I parked at a store about half a mile away, and then walked to the hotel. It was mostly isolated on the side of the road, as most of the stores surrounding it had already been torn down. The hotel itself looked a lot worse than the last time I'd seen it. The brick was crumbling, and the whole place seemed like it was fading and decaying. Went up to the front and glanced inside. It was mostly empty, with only a few things scattered around, like chairs and old furniture. I stepped in and walked to the lobby, opened the door to the staircase. The whole stairwell was covered in shadows. Barely any light was getting in, and all I could see was a dim beam of sunlight coming from one of the floors above. It was just enough for me to find my way up the stairs. When I got to this door on the second story, it was blocked. Something on the other side was keeping it from opening, and a sheet of wood was covering the window on the door. I left it and continued up to the third story, opening the door and entering the hallway. This was probably the creepiest setting I'd ever been in. The hallway was dark and musty, with only a small window at either end to light up the corridor. I walked down a little bit, then went to the first room with an open door. Oddly, it looked kind of normal. There were layers of dust covering everything, but all the furniture had been set up as if it had never been moved. There were even towels and soap left in the bathroom. Still, as I was looking at all this, I heard a small thump. I turned around and faced the doorway, not sure if the sound came from the floor I was on or the one below me. A few seconds later, quiet footsteps creaked down the floorboards, just down the hallway. As they got closer, I just stared at the doorway and hoped they weren't on my floor. After a few seconds, though, I heard them stop, followed by a door opening and slamming shut on the floor below me. After that, there were no footsteps, or really any sounds at all. I tried to be quiet as I walked up to the hallway and looked out to make sure nobody else was there. Thinking about it, I couldn't understand why someone else would just explore the place and walk out so deliberately to a room and slam the door. And the more I thought about it, the more nervous I got. The silence in the building only added to the eeriness. After a minute of standing in the hallway and thinking, I'd had enough. I quietly walked back to the staircase and opened the door, entering the dark stairwell and starting to descend. There was no way to be quiet on the metal stairs. Each step was an unavoidable hollow thump. As I passed the door to the second story, I noticed a small gap in the doorway that definitely hadn't been there before. Then I looked down at the stairs ahead of me. A figure stood in the stairwell, only a few steps below me, barely visible in the darkness, but their eyes stared right at me. They looked dreadful and emotionless. With no choice, I started carefully walking along the edge of the staircase, passing them by with only a couple feet between us. As their eyes followed me with every move I made. Once I got to the bottom, I opened the door and ran out into the lobby, where I could finally see clearly. I hurried back to my car and sat in the parking lot for a while. Looking back, that was probably the dumbest thing I'd ever done. I guess I just didn't realize what I was walking into. I'm not sure why that person was there, what they were doing, but leaving when I did was probably the only good decision I made. I was in some forest a few hours from my town, and I'd set up camp at the end of a 4-hour trail. I'd spent the night there already, and I'd noticed this thin path leading out from the campsite. I had no idea where it went, and it wasn't on the map of the area. But having nothing better to do on that second day, I thought I'd go for a short hike down the path, just to see if it led anywhere cool. Maybe a small pond, or a waterfall, or something. I brought with me a backpack with food and water in case I'd be out longer than expected walking down the trail. It was very obvious that almost nobody used it, or at least hadn't used it in a long time, maybe even years. It was very thin and overgrown in a lot of sections, and I didn't see any signs of people like shoe prints or anything. This went on for several miles, taking around 2 hours before I found the end. It wasn't what I was expecting. There was a house, or cabin, sitting in the woods. At first sight, there was no mistaking that it was abandoned. Moss and vines were growing out of the wood. Siding and the doors and windows were all open. Before approaching any further, I looked around at my surroundings, just checking for anything, as this wasn't a normal thing to stumble across. The woods were calm and unsettlingly still. I went up to the doorway and poked my head in. Looking down the front hallway, there was dust and debris lying all over the floor, but it was otherwise barren. I went in a little further, smelled of mildew and rotting wood, but as I crept through the rooms, there wasn't much to see. Feeling uneasy, I was about to turn around and leave, but a small glimmer caught the side of my eye on one of the closed wooden doors. The handle had been ripped off and replaced by a silver padlock. It looked almost brand new and matched nothing else in the house. My curiosity immediately had me thinking of why there was a padlock on the door to an otherwise empty and ruined cabin. The more I looked at it, though, the uneasy feeling just took over me, and I couldn't get myself to investigate. I quickly left the house and went back to the path. Just as I entered the trail again, I heard a single footstep on the wooden floor inside the house. I turned and saw nothing at the doorway, so I kept on walking, trying to distance myself from that place. As I was walking, though, for the whole 2 hours, I kept hearing footsteps in the distance, like someone was following me. The trees densely covered the area, though, making it impossible to see that far. When I got back to camp, I got a fire going early and just sat and waited, listening and looking to see if anyone showed up. By nightfall, I hadn't heard anything else, but as the hours got later, I started hearing it again. Footsteps, out in the distance, far beyond the light of the campfire, but definitely close enough for them to see the light. It went on for several hours, hearing a lot of footsteps every 10 or 15 minutes. Still low, I was never able to see them, and eventually got so late that I knew I had to sleep, so I left the campfire going. As I got inside my tent, I was in and out of sleep for the rest of the night, waking up at every small sound the woods made. After getting almost no sleep, I left. What the cabin was doing there, whoever had followed me that night, I'll never know. I can't say what they intended to do, but their disturbing stalking behavior only left me to assume the worst. But I can never seem to stop thinking about what disturbing possibilities of what may have been locked behind that door.